The following tale is plucked from the pages of a nameless tome, a manuscript whispered of in hushed tones by those who dare tread too close to the edge of sanity. It is said that merely speaking of the events you are about to hear invites danger beyond reckoning. For these are the deeds and misdeeds of souls whose fates were sealed the moment they crossed into shadowed realms where darkness reigns eternal. Be warned, listener, do not repeat what you hear to others. Do not commit these words to memory, nor linger on the images conjured within your mind. To do so is to risk incurring the wrath of, well, perhaps it is best if I leave the name unspoken. Even now, it claws at the corners of my mind. Know this, should you choose to continue, you do so at your own peril. And remember, you have been warned. This is a tale called The Lynching of Shadows. The sweltering heat of a southern summer hung over the small town of Maplewood, Georgia, like a suffocating shroud. It was 1956, a time when hatred and intolerance simmered beneath the surface, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. Tensions between the black community and the white townspeople were at an all-time high, but the facade of peace held firm by fear and the iron fist of Sheriff Raymond Larkin and his corrupt officers. Joshua Sanders, a young black man of 22, stood at the crossroads of his life. He was the first in his family to attend college, a proud student at Howard University, with just 4 months left until graduation. He had dreams of leaving Maplewood behind and building a life of dignity and respect, not just for himself, but for his entire family. Joshua's family lived on the outskirts of town, in a modest home filled with love, laughter, and an unwavering hope for the future. Every day, he took pride in studying hard, knowing that his success would break the chains that bound his family to a life of poverty and oppression. But there were those in Maplewood who despised the very thought of a black man rising above his station. Among them were Sheriff Larkin and his deputies, a group of men whose twisted beliefs fueled the fires of racial hatred. Sheriff Larkin, a towering figure with a face like chiseled stone and cold blue eyes, ruled the town like a tyrant. Beneath his belt, he carried the power of law and the dark privilege of prejudice, and his deputies, a band of equally vile men, followed his orders with sadistic delight. Joshua had become a target of their scorn, a young man who dared to dream beyond the narrow confines of what they deemed acceptable. And it was that audacity, that courage to hope, which sealed his fate. The beginning of the end came on a hot Friday afternoon. Joshua had come back home for a short visit, taking a break from his studies. As he walked through town, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of his future, he failed to notice the group of men watching him with disdain from the steps of the courthouse. Sheriff Larkin narrowed his eyes as Joshua passed by, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "Look at him, strutting around like he owns the place," Larkin muttered to Deputy Earl, a thick-set man with a cruel streak as wide as the Mississippi. "We need to remind that boy where he belongs." Earl spat a wad of tobacco onto the ground. "Just say the word, Sheriff. We can take care of him real easy." Larkin glanced around, ensuring no one was close enough to hear. "It's time we teach him a lesson he won't forget. Get the others. We're gonna have us a little hunt tonight." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the crickets began their nightly symphony, Joshua sat on the front porch of his family's home, enjoying the cool breeze that swept through the trees. His mother, a strong-willed woman with a tender heart, stood behind him, a soft smile on her face. "You're gonna make us all proud, Joshua," she said, her voice filled with love and pride. "Just 4 more months, and you'll be a college graduate. You'll be the first Sanders to make it." Joshua looked back at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "It's all because of you and Pa, Ma. You both believed in me. I couldn't have done it without your support." A sudden knock at the door interrupted their conversation, the sound echoing ominously through the quiet night. Joshua frowned and stood up, his gaze shifting to the dark figures that loomed on the porch steps. Sheriff Larkin stepped forward, tipping his hat with a mock politeness. "Evenin', Mrs. Sanders." "Joshua. Sorry to bother you folks so late, but we've got some questions that need answerin'. Joshua's mother stiffened, her smile vanishing. What's this about, Sheriff? There was an incident in town earlier today, Larkin drawled, his eyes never leaving Joshua's. A young white woman was attacked. Folks are saying they saw a man matching Joshua's description near the scene. Joshua's mouth dropped open in shock. That's a lie. I haven't been anywhere near town since this morning. Is that so? Larkin sneered, his smile widening. Well, why don't you come down to the station with us and tell your side of the story? Clear things up, nice and easy. Joshua's mother stepped forward, her expression fierce. You're not taking my son anywhere without just cause. He's done nothing wrong. But Larkin's deputies were already advancing, their hands on the butts of their guns. Step back, ma'am. We just want to talk to him, one of them said, though his tone held no sincerity. Fear flashed through Joshua's eyes, but he forced himself to remain calm. It's okay, Ma. I'll go with them and clear this up. I'll be back before you know it. He stepped forward, but as soon as he did, the deputies grabbed him roughly, yanking his arms behind his back and slapping cuffs on his wrists. Hey! Joshua protested, struggling against their hold. What are you doing? Larkin chuckled darkly. Just making sure you don't get any ideas about running, boy. Sheriff, please, his mother cried, reaching out, but the deputies shoved her back. We'll take good care of him, Larkin promised with a sneer. Don't you worry. As Joshua was dragged away, his mother's anguished cries echoed through the night, filling him with a sense of dread. He knew, deep down, that something terrible was about to happen. Hours later, Joshua found himself bound and gagged in the back of a dusty police truck. The road beneath them was rough, jolting the vehicle violently as they sped away from town and into the darkened woods. His wrists were chafed raw from the ropes, and his heart hammered in his chest. The truck finally skidded to a stop in a small clearing. Sheriff Larkin and his deputies climbed out, grinning like hyenas as they yanked Joshua from the truck and threw him to the ground. This is what happens to folks who think they're better than everyone else, Larkin sneered, kicking Joshua hard in the ribs. You thought you could just waltz out of here and make something of yourself, didn't you, boy? Joshua groaned, pain radiating through his body. He tried to speak, to beg for his life, but the gag muffled his pleas. Shut him up. Deputy Earl growled, pulling out a dirty cloth and shoving it over Joshua's mouth. The clearing was soon filled with the sounds of drunken laughter and jeers as more men from town arrived, forming a circle around Joshua. They held torches and ropes, their faces twisted into masks of hatred and malice. String him up, one of them shouted, and a cheer erupted from the crowd. Joshua's mind spun with fear and confusion. Why were they doing this? He had done nothing wrong. He had dreams, a future, and now it was all slipping away. The men dragged him toward a large oak tree that loomed over the clearing like a sinister sentinel. They tossed a rope over a thick branch, tightening the noose around Joshua's neck. Tears streamed down his face as he looked around at the faces of men he had known his whole life. These were the same men who had nodded to him on the streets, who had smiled and waved, and now they were here, thirsting for his blood. Any last words, boy? Larkin taunted, his eyes gleaming with a sadistic pleasure. But Joshua couldn't speak. The cloth in his mouth prevented any words from escaping, and the terror in his eyes was all he could express. Thought not, Larkin sneered, and with a cruel laugh, he gestured to the men holding the rope. Do it. The rope tightened, and Joshua felt the ground slip away. His body jerked violently as he was lifted into the air, the noose biting into his neck. His vision blurred, the world fading to darkness as pain and panic consumed him. But then, just as he thought death would claim him, something strange happened. The wind, which had been still all night, suddenly picked up, whipping through the clearing with an unholy force. The torches flickered and went out, plunging the woods into an impenetrable blackness. "What the hell?" one of the men muttered, looking around in confusion. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the air, vibrating the very ground beneath their feet. The men froze, fear slicing through their drunken haze. And then, out of the shadows, something emerged. Something monstrous. The creature that stepped into the clearing was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its skin was the color of midnight, rippling with dark, sinewy muscles. Its eyes glowed like burning embers, piercing through the night with a malevolent intelligence. Long, clawed fingers twitched at its sides, and a wicked smile revealed rows of razor-sharp teeth. The men stumbled back, horror etched across their faces. What is that?" Deputy Earl whispered, his voice shaking. Larkin tried to draw his gun, but his hand trembled so badly that he dropped it. Get back," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Stay back, you demon." But the creature only chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that sent chills racing down their spines. It raised one clawed hand and pointed at Joshua, who hung limply from the noose, his body still twitching weakly. With a flick of its wrist, the rope snapped, and Joshua fell to the ground, gasping for air. The men watched in stunned silence as Joshua slowly rose to his feet, the noose still hanging loosely around his neck. His eyes, once filled with terror, now blazed with an unholy fire. "You wanted to kill me," Joshua said, his voice low and resonant, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. "But death has turned its back on me." The men exchanged terrified glances, unsure of what to do. What are you?" Larkin whispered, taking a step back. Joshua smiled, a smile that was not his own. "I am vengeance," he replied softly. "And you, all of you, will pay the price for your hatred." With a roar, the creature lunged at the nearest man, its claws ripping through flesh and bone as if they were made of paper. Blood sprayed across the clearing, and the man's scream was cut short as his body was torn in half. Panic erupted as the men scrambled to escape, but there was no escape. The darkness around them seemed to come alive, swallowing their screams and choking the air from their lungs. One by one, they fell, clawed apart, crushed, and devoured by the creature that moved with an inhuman speed and ferocity. The clearing became a slaughterhouse, the men's blood soaking into the earth like a sacrificial offering. And through it all, Joshua stood at the center of the chaos, his gaze unblinking as the men who had sought his death were annihilated. When the sun rose the next morning, it revealed a sight that would haunt the town of Maplewood for generations to come. The bodies of Sheriff Larkin and his deputies, along with the other men who had taken part in the lynching, were found strewn across the clearing, their limbs twisted and broken, their faces frozen in expressions of abject terror. Joshua's body was never found. Some say he vanished into the night, carried away by the darkness that had come to claim him. Others whisper that he became one with the creature, a spirit of vengeance, forever cursed to roam the woods, hunting those who dared to spill innocent blood. The town's white population dwindled after that, fear driving many to leave and never look back. The story of the lynching was buried, never spoken of again, but the shadows of what happened that night lingered in Maplewood's memory. And those who stayed, they knew. They knew that the darkness was always watching, waiting for the next soul to step out of line. Because the lynching of Joshua Sanders was only the beginning. For the monster that had been unleashed that night, it was far from finished. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this tale. I hope you enjoyed the story and felt immersed in this world of fantasy and adventure. If you'd like to hear more epic stories like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next chapter in our journey. See you in the next adventure.